Somebody left a comment on my blog. I didn't publish it because of my uncompromising blog commenting policy, which prevents me from publishing things I don't like. So anyway, this comment, I figure it's like a radio show. My blog is like a radio show. You leave a comment, you're calling into my radio show. If you're going to call in and abuse me, I'm hanging up on you. I'm sorry. Next caller, okay? I'm not going to publish your rant. Start your own blog. But what this guy said is, he was complaining about how I'd said in a blog post that I've spoken to hundreds of testers. And he said, you are so full of it. Give me the names of all these hundreds of testers we talked to. And I'm like, okay, in the last 3 weeks, I've been to Cape Town, South Africa, where I did an evening event like this. I've been in Stockholm, where I did an evening event like this. And here I am in Birmingham, England. But I didn't get anybody's name. So I need you all to write your names down so that Hooperman, or whatever his name is, can go, oh, I'm sorry. I guess you weren't totally lying about talking to testers. Speaking to testers in terms of classes, online coaching, peer conferences, big conferences, events like this, dinners, that's what I do with almost all of my time. I'm home about 30 days a year. So far I've been home 2.5 weeks. And all the rest of the time I'm off doing this kind of thing. I'm like a fisherman, I'm like an ancient whaler. I send the money home now instead of rowing a boat with the money home. But I'm out, I do the fishing, my wife's at home at the widow's watch looking for me to come back. And I think spending all the money, I'm pretty sure. So that's what I do, and I love it, and I thank you for inviting me here to do this. It's good therapy for me to do this, because usually in my hotel room, when I pretend you're all there, it's not as effective. Even if I stack the pillows up as if there were people there, it doesn't work. So I want to talk about transitioning to context-driven testing. What does that mean? And in order to do that, I first have to talk a little bit about what context-driven is, and I want to shoot out some flavors of context-driven, some of the elements of context-driven for you. One of the things is it's about, I suppose you could say it's about science. It's about looking at the world and trying to understand how the world works, and accepting the world as it is, as far as we have the lights to see how the world is, and then reacting to that, as opposed to defining a game and insisting that this game we like to play is close enough to what the world really is, and let's just play our game and try our best to ignore anything in the world that doesn't fit our game. Some people like to play the game of I only test what's in the spec. That's a game that works sometimes. People sometimes are able to do that. Like if it's not in the spec, I won't test it. But often the world won't let us play that game. That game does not fit the world that we're in. And so the world intrudes. Reality intrudes upon our fantasy. One of the cornerstones of context-driven work of any kind is to respect the context. Respect what's going on in the world. Context means what's happening in the world. Everything that's happening in the world that may relate to the problem at hand, that's what context is. Context-driven means to solve problems by noticing what's going on and crafting a solution that actually helps in that situation. Non-context-driven is something else, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Another element of the community of context-driven people is we argue a lot. I'm a very argumentative person. Really, I am. I can prove it. I'm a very argumentative person, so I'm drawn to that anyway. And I found myself in the context-driven community, partly because I founded it, but I found myself in the community of people who founded the context-driven community because I was repelled by people who refused to argue. who said, this is the tradition, this is the way it is, you are too young to know, to understand, as I was young in those days. And I'm still a little bit young, but not really, not as much as I was. I used to be the youngest person on every team that I was on. I started working when I was 16 years old. I was the youngest manager at Apple Computer. I defined myself as I'm the youngest guy here. And now I'm working with lots of people who are much younger than me, and so it's a very strange kind of new role that I have of Obi-Wan instead of Luke. So, what's that? I found a pin. That's got to be some good thing for a tester to find a pin in the middle of, I've been looking for this pin. Okay, so what was I saying? I'm easily distracted. That's another good thing about being a tester. Wait, I was talking about context-driven, yes. So we vigorously, in the context-driven world, we believe in vigorous debate and discussion. But our debate and discussion is based on experiences. We place a very high value on experiences, especially shared experiences, because we find that this makes the arguments go so much better. So, Simon, you had where'd you go, Simon? Oh, there you had an experience with Cucumber. And you can say what your experience is, and you can talk about that, and I can't come along and say, you didn't have that experience. I mean, that would be very strange for me to say. I deny you had that experience. If you said, I thought it was really great, then I can question your experience. I can say, what specifically is great about it? Sometimes people say things like, I used TMAP, and it really helped me. The TMAP testing framework. Are you familiar with TMAP? Anyone heard of TMAP? Or I used ICE, it was really great, and I go, okay, that's an experience, but let me understand exactly what your experience is. Now, what did TMAP do? And take me through it. The TMAP book is sitting there, and what does the TMAP book do next? It just sits there, right? It doesn't like get up and move around or talk to you and say, do this now. You have to interact with the TMAP book. So it's you doing it. It's not TMAP, right? What is it about TMAP that is TMAP doing anything? Isn't TMAP just an organization of ideas that have been around for a long time? So what's the special TMAP secret sauce? I can question that experience is the point. I can get in there and I can analyze that experience. We can talk about this. This makes the debates go better. Because when we don't have to ground what we say in experiences, then we end up in complicated word games very easily. So in the context-driven world, we're big on experiences. And we're big on debates about experiences. And this is where it all began. In 1997, Ken Kaner held the first peer conference that, as far as I know, ever happened in any testing community anywhere. A peer conference is a conference where people get together in a facilitated environment. So there's a facilitator. Everyone comes with experience in the theme of that meeting. Everyone is a speaker, and everyone has a chance to stand up and tell a war story. We called them the first term war stories, and after that some politically correct. Realize we didn't anticipate until much later. We didn't realize that by doing this, we were creating a new kind of community within testing. Because it turned out that once you've been through a peer conference experience in this facilitated environment with a content owner keeping the agenda in order and people with experiences telling their experiences and answering to their peers, once you get through that, you start feeling like discussion is very important. Disorderly discussion, yes. Respectful discussion, sure. But discussion is very important, and people must face their peers. They can't just say, I have this great idea. Okay, see you later. Sorry, don't have time. Whoa, great. I got out of another one without having to really explain myself on that one. We found that there's a risk when you tell an experience report at a peer conference. The risk is if you didn't really have that experience, you will be exposed in the questioning process. So if you kind of are fudging it, it's very hard to keep your story straight. And certain people came through our community and blew their reputations and are not welcome in our community anymore. And other people came to peer conferences and felt like, oh, I'm not getting what I need. I want best practices. I want answers that I can use on Monday morning. And those people dropped out too. But the people who remain are people who say, I don't need you to tell me what to do Monday morning. I want to hear your experiences. And that to me is like the raw ingredients that I will cook into a delicious souffle, which I will eat for myself. I don't need you to tell me how to learn from your experiences. I will learn from your experiences. I will learn by my questioning. I will learn by my listening. I will learn by your insights as well as my own mix with yours. I don't need anyone's permission to learn from you. I don't need anyone's help to learn from you. And that's some of the most fabulous, wonderful insights come from that. Don't boil down what you have to say into little bullet items that I'll just memorize and go home with and say best practices. And that's another thing we learned at this conference. We began to have these conferences on a regular basis every few months, get these people together. We'd have new people come in, some old people would drop out. Mostly it was a lot of the same people, conference after conference. We ended up doing, I think, 15 of the Los Altos workshops on software testing before that stopped. We did something like 15 software test management roundtables, which were also peer conferences. There have been something like 17 Whoppers, workshops on performance and reliability testing. There have been 4 workshops on heuristic and exploratory techniques. There have been, I think, 12 or 13 workshops on training software testers. There have been WETs and Whatsits and Quests and Pests. The first Pest happened in Estonia, the Peers of Estonia Software Testing. And the theme of their meeting was great. The theme they chose for their first meeting was my worst testing moment and what I learned from it. What a beautiful idea that was. And the first day, people had their worst testing moments, and I was making fun of them because, like, that's your worst testing moment. It's like you broke a nail, basically. I mean, like, I got the wrong test. Really? That's it? I mean, you didn't sync the project. You didn't. There's got to be some more. And then the second day, we had some real worst moments. We had some like disastrous things that happened to testers that they had made mistakes that had hurt people and it was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, real disasters. Meanwhile, I'm making a list. I ended up with a list of more than 30 things which were candidates for my worst testing moment as I was watching everyone else go like, oh yeah, I did that one. I made that mistake. I totally forgot about that. But I did that one too. And in that environment, you felt like it was okay to talk about the formative mistakes of your career. And by talking about them, you get better. And by talking about them in this environment, you don't lose stature, you gain stature. That's a wonderful turnabout. So, these peer conferences started going everywhere, and there's something we learned after the first few losts in 1999. I was having, November 21st, 1999, I was having dinner with Kem Kainer and Brian Merrick, and Kem started talking about how he was noticing that our community had certain patterns that held it together. We were different than the people that we were criticizing commonly in our various talks that we would give at conferences in '99. And he felt he had put his finger on it, and he felt that what we were is we were context-driven, that we respected the social environment, the social context of the project, and instead of saying best practices, we would say, here's a practice that might work in this context. Here's a practice that might not work in that context, but it works in this context, perhaps. And that we are aware of various elements, and we are happy to use practices and say that they might work here and not there. So I suggested we're the heuristic community. That's what we should call ourselves, a heuristic community. And they said, no. It ended up being the context-driven community. That was the word that Kem came up with that the rest of us felt like was pretty good. I brought this to Jerry Weinberg, a very famous author of many books on software engineering. He said, why don't you say context-aware? I don't like context-driven. Context-driven there's too much forcefulness. It's more like context-aware. I'm like, yeah, but we really feel like we want to put that extra Tabasco, that extra pizzazz into it, because we really kind of feel like we are driven in the sense of we cannot ignore the context. We do not ignore the context. We respect the context and we deal with the context. Instead of saying, I don't care what your history is, follow TMAT. I don't care what your history is, the capability maturity model will save you. I don't care what your disease is, aspirin is the cure. Okay? So we say, well, maybe we should examine the patient before we prescribe a medicine. That's our attitude. So context-driven testing is three things. These three things are overlapping and yet distinct, and this is part of what confuses people about context-driven, is that these three things are a bit amorphous. The context-driven testing is an all-encompassing philosophy of testing. It's a worldview of testing. It's a lens from which you could see and interpret any testing problem or situation. So it's a paradigm. In the Thomas Kuhnian sense of the word, it's a paradigm, a worldview of testing. I like to say it's like a religion of testing, and other people go, oh, don't say that because all these things come in. But it is actually, I would argue, an effective metaphor, because some people say, well, but I'm sometimes context-driven and sometimes I'm other things. Well, that's not how it works. If you have an all-encompassing philosophy, you don't just say, I'm Jewish today, but I might be Muslim tomorrow. Like, I don't think that's not how religion works. It's a commitment to a particular worldview. That's what we're talking about. It's your fundamental belief, not some clothes that you decide to wear that day. Underneath the clothing, there's some fundamental you, some fundamental belief that you have about testing. That's the paradigm that you have. Well, but that's not the only thing context-driven is. It is also an approach. It's an approach to testing. So there is an aspect of context-driven where you can put it on and take it off. You can say, I'm going to do this in a context-driven way. And you can do that. And then later on you can say, oh, okay, now I'm going to do this in something that's not a context-driven way. So that's why it's a bit confusing, is because there are aspects of things there are certain practices that are very context-driven-y, you might say, that they are characteristic of what the context-driven paradigm calls for, and so people who are not necessarily in the context-driven paradigm might use some of those things too. The third thing is that it's a community of people. It's a group of people who identify themselves as being context-driven people. But not all of those people might fully accept the paradigm or fully do the approach. So it's a bit confusing. Not like Agile, because I think Agile is kind of similar. It's, to some extent, it's a paradigm, to some extent it's an approach, and to some extent it's a community. The same kind of thing happens in Agile. And people are similarly confused about Agile. But what do you want? We're humans, and this is what we do. We mix different ideas together, and things cross from community to philosophy on a regular basis. But if you understand that that's happening, you can maybe be a little more steady as you confront what's going on. So my community is called the context-driven community. And some people in the community are extremely dedicated to context-driven approach and the context-driven paradigm itself. And other people not so much, but they're still respected in my community. You might say that they have dual citizenship in a certain respect, or they're visitors that are honored visitors from other lands in our community. And I think mostly that's because we always think that, well, they probably really are solidly context-driven. They just don't know it yet, and they'll probably decide to settle here someday. As far as transitioning to context-driven, well, the world has a lot of other schools of thought in it, and our community has done the service or done the crime, however you think about it, but we have decided to name what we see as the other schools of thought, which declined to name themselves. Except one community did name itself, but the rest declined to name themselves. Because I think one of the reasons why the other schools of thought don't name themselves is they want to be thought of as the only school. So of course you're not going to name yourself if you think you're the only game in town and you want everyone to believe that. If someone comes along and says, I think about testing in a very different way than you do, so now there's two worldviews of testing in the world, not just yours, but there's mine too, you don't suddenly go around to your clients and go, oh, by the way, I just found out that I'm not the only way that there is to think about testing, so keep that in mind. I have competitors now. Thank you. Like, no, you go, I'll just ignore him. Ignore those annoying people that are always arguing and having peer conferences, learning from each other and stuff. Let me get back to my standards making for ISO so I can force everyone to do things my way, since they won't listen to me any other way. Or my name isn't Stuart Reed. So for example. Anyway, the other schools of thought, the biggest one out there, I would say, is the factory school of software testing. The factory school tries to eliminate the human element. Humans are squishy and unreliable. It's kind of like one of those Doctor Who episodes where some robot is going, humans are weak. We will eliminate the defective element. That's the factory school. And the factory school, you know the factory school because they don't say, oh, are you a good tester? I wonder if you know how to test. What ideas do you have, tester? Instead, it's like, where are your test cases? Well, I don't care about you. Your test case, you exist to give birth to test cases. So start squeezing them out. You are a test case breeder system for me. And I am the matrix. That's the attitude. Test case management systems instead of testing management systems that are based on people testing. I use activity-based management when I test, when I manage testing, either people-based or activity-based test management. Activity-based means I manage test activities. Test activities are things testers do. I make lists of things testers do. I wonder whether things testers do are being done well. And to do that, I have to go to the testers, talk to the testers, and watch the testers, because it all revolves around the tester. In my paradigm, humans are paramount. Humans are the only thing that you can't shake out, that you have to live with, that you have to embrace. You know what? Programmers have figured this out. Have you noticed that whenever programmers automate any programming, they don't call it programming automation. They don't call it automated programming, do they? They call it compiling. Compilers are automated programmers, but they won't be called automated programmers because programmers have figured out that you have to call programming that which programmers do. And that way they've enshrined themselves, rightly, I believe, as the people who figure out how to make computers go. And that's one reason why I'm bothered by the cucumber thing. It's another one of these, we don't need programmers. We don't need programmers. Create something that means that I don't need programmers anymore. Here's some cucumber. Eat that. Ooh, it's... Ugh. So, anyway, the factory school is the biggest school out there. And the reason why it's the biggest school out there is because it's very easy to fake factory school testing. And fake testing is big business. Fake testing makes a lot of money for people. That's why fake, or also I sometimes have a nicer word for fake testing, ceremonial software testing. That's software testing where you dress up in robes and you carry staffs around or something and you wear different kinds of hats and you go, boom, bugs are gone. And then people go, there, now our software is lucky because it's been ceremonially blessed, by the testers. We don't know. They're mysterious people, these testers. I think that's a lot of what fake testing is all about. Write up a whole bunch of test documentation. Oh, but this test documentation actually is not helping your software. Be quiet, tester. You're interrupting my process of ceremonializing testing. And then what happens when the software is buggy? Do they go, oh, you were right. Ceremonial software testing sucks. No, they don't say that. They go, it must be that we don't have enough of them. I know, let's fire all these expensive ones and outsource the whole thing to an inexpensive geography. That way we can have even more of them doing the same thing that shouldn't have been done in the first place, but more of it. And the other thing that they say is, oh, the testers must have done something wrong. Or they say, oh, the products just have bugs in them. What can you do? Cell phone calls just drop. What can you do? That's just technology for you. It can't be any better. So there's a fatalism that goes with this that protects this ceremonial software testing. Now, whose interest is it to maintain ceremonial software testing? The executives, of course. The executives, because they want to say they have testing, but they don't want all the trouble that testers make. Don't they make a lot of trouble? Well, what if we did something that looked like testing, but had no trouble, wasn't as troublesome as testing? Wouldn't that be a way to get everything? Because then you just blame the testers when something goes wrong, but no one can blame you because you had testers. They can't say you were reckless. So anyway, the factory school is easy to fake because it's all about shuffling documents and papers around, and it looks good to people who don't know very much about testing. And it's a big, big business. It's a big, big school. I see the ISTQB as part of that whole thing, and ISEB is all part of servicing the factory school mythology. But there are other schools. There's the analytical school. The analytical school is mostly made up of academics, people in universities who look down their noses at factory school testing. They also look down their noses at everyone who's not in university. And their idea is testing is defined as the research problem I'm working on right now. Further research is required. Funding gratefully accepted. And so they try to generally define some micro world and then define some kind of formula or tool that will, in their micro world, produce a specific effect. And then they try to generalize that. And sometimes there are companies that spin off, tool companies that spin off from this kind of thing. That's the analytical school. I really don't have a problem with the analytical school. I think they have some really cool ideas, and I think that we can learn from their ideas. I don't think we need to fear the analytical school because they don't do testing. They don't actually control anything in the industry. Analytical school people are like little like krill or something that come into industry and immediately freeze to death and then just explode away. They can't survive in the ecosystem of industry, so they pretty much just dance and play like little Smurfs in Smurf Village. So then there's the quality control school. The quality control school, they're like parasites. They're not actually testers. They don't want to be testers. The way you know that you're talking to the quality control school of thought is that they immediately say, testing's not the point. We shouldn't even be testing. Where it's at is prevention. We want prevention. I'm just in testing because I'm trying to convince these people that what they really need is prevention. But as soon as I take over, I'm banishing the test group. So the quality control people are few and far between because they tend to self-immolate. They want to get out of testing as fast as they can into management where they can do their prevention thing. And I don't really have a problem with the prevention people either, except that why are you doing testing? Why are you wasting my time? Why don't you go start a company where you don't have any testers, go out of business, and leave me alone? So then there's analytic, factory, and then there's one more school, and this school is really interesting, and that's the Agile school. The Agile school of testing is growing. It's pretty vibrant. I would say about the Agile school just that I am not an Agile school guy, but I know some people who are Agile school people who I think are really fine people and they're good thinkers, and I think they're strangely obsessed with Agile. From a context-driven point of view, Agile is kind of a strange obsession, like collecting Barbie dolls or something. Like, it's okay, you can collect dolls. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but is that all you do? Really? You collect? You like that? Huh? That's what you do. And that's how I feel about Agile. It's like, that's a cool idea, Agile. What other ideas do we have? Oh, you just want to do the Agile thing? Okay, all right. Well, what about learning testing skills, and only if it's in Agile? Okay, all right. So, and you learn programming mostly, and you're really obsessed with tools, and that's Agile people. I don't really have a problem with them, except I think that they don't study testing very much. They're not really interested in testing. They're interested in programming. They're interested in tools. They seem to love tools. So sometimes people say context-driven testing is a flavor of Agile. There's a popular definition out there, not written by anyone who's respected at all in the context-driven community, but it's been repeated and copied on websites all over the place. And it starts out, context-driven testing is a flavor of Agile testing. No, it isn't. It is not a flavor of Agile testing. Agile could be potentially considered to be a flavor of context-driven, but not really, because in Agile, you have two kinds of Agile. You got capital A Agile, and you got small a Agile. I'm small a. I consider myself a small a Agilist, but I'm not capital A. Capital A is where you say, I do BDD and TDD and pair everything and Scrum everything and extreme programming and Crystal. And I do all these specific practices. That's what Agile is these practices. And small a Agile is, I'm interested in minimizing the cost of change. Because change is something in every context I know that's worth thinking about. Change is something that you have to deal with instead of prevent. Traditional methodology attempts to prevent change. That's the difference between Agile methodology, small a Agile methodology, and traditional methodology. Traditional methodology is organized to try to eliminate the cost of change by eliminating or avoiding change itself. Whereas small a Agile says, we're going to have change, we're going to be learning, we're going to be learning all the time, so let's anticipate that and let's roll with that. That's basically how I see the difference. And I'm a small a Agilist, at the same time I'm a context-driven guy, because I feel like a dominating aspect of every context I encounter is change. And therefore, of course it makes sense to be very up with ways that we can roll with change. So I have a lot of good things to say about Agilists. My favorite Agilist, who I am annoyed with on a regular basis, but I cannot deny her amazing skills and wisdom, is Elizabeth Hendrickson, who I once hired to do test automation, and she was fabulous. She was wonderful years and years ago, before she got kind of famous. I had her do test automation for me, and I just loved her work. And but some years ago, she got in an argument with me and Cam, and I guess she didn't like being argued with. And we realized that she just doesn't like arguing. And if you don't like arguing and you're not willing to argue, you really can't be respected in the context-driven community. That's sort of a constant. It's like you've got to be able to take a punch. You have to be able to do it. That's how we are. We believe that we must be self-critical. We believe we must accept criticism. You said constructive criticism, damn that. Devastating criticism, whatever. Any kind of criticism, I'm expected to process it somehow. It may be poison when it leaves your lips, but I shall transform it in my mind to something like flowers. It's my duty to do that. And I can't always do that, but it's my duty to try anyway. Because we're worried we're worried by polite culture, basically, because we'd seen for years. I got into the industry in the testing business in '87. Before that, I was a video game programmer, but I lived a very insular life. I was like a mountain man. I didn't know about fancy things like roadways and horseless carriages. I worked on a card table in a living room, and then I graduated to a card table in a laundry room, and then I graduated to a garage. Imagine that, a garage! And that was the pinnacle, a remodeled garage. And then I worked at Apple Computer, and I didn't even know how office buildings work. I mean, can you just walk into an office building? I honestly didn't know. I saw these things called conference rooms. Can you just walk into a conference room, or do you have to get permission? Who controls the conference rooms? What about that copy machine over there? Do I have to take a class, or do you just let me press the buttons? It's awful big and expensive. You just let anybody walk up and start pressing buttons? That is so cool. and the huge popcorn machine, and the whole place at Apple smelled like popcorn, which sounds great until you smell popcorn for 2 weeks, and then your nasal linings are bleeding now. You're getting little cancerous polyps from the damn popcorn smell. Oh yeah, never. That sounds great. There's lots of things that sound great until you have to do it for 2 weeks every day for straight, and then you realize, no mas. So anyway. I've been in the industry a long time, since '87 as a tester, and what I kept seeing is we kept seeing people telling us that the testing has to be a certain way, and other people not challenging them. Oh, well, he's very famous, and oh, don't ask those kinds of questions in the conference. It upsets people. And oh, he's very respected. Wow, how dare you? How dare you ask that question? Like, are you as much an idiot as you seem? I didn't ever ask a question like that, but I wanted to. But there are things. Here's a question I asked that was an impolite question that I think was a very important question. A famous man named Watts Humphrey, who created the capability maturity model, was standing up talking about his maturity model, and I was going to do a speech right after him. And this was years ago, like more than 10 years ago. And right after him, I was going to get up and do this talk. And so he said that through using his maturity model, one particular project reduced its testing time by 96%. Wow. So I raised my hand and said, can I see your raw data? I want to see the before and after raw data observations that you made for that, because I really want to understand this remarkable claim. He said, oh, I'm sorry, it's proprietary. Oh, it's proprietary. Well, here's the problem, Watts. It's not that I don't believe you. It's that I have no idea what you're talking about. You can't just use a number like 96% and just throw that out there and think you're communicating anything to me. That is an outrageous claim. Maybe if you say 1%, I go, oh, well, man, someone could lose a half a pound in 2 days. I suppose that's possible. It's not an extraordinary claim. I don't necessarily need to review your notes on that. I can take your word for it. But when somebody says something like 96% decrease in testing time, I go, is testing the same thing to me as it is to you? Are you talking about they just turned everything into regression tests, right? And then they just push the button and they're calling that testing? I don't think I would call that testing. We might have some very big differences of opinion here. I really need to see that data. And if I can't see that data, I can't respect you. You understand? You can't just make claims like that and act like you're being all scientific and then refuse to share with your fellow scientific thinkers your notes. That's not how it works. That's marketing, but that doesn't deserve any regard if you do that and you want to be considered a serious thinker. And he should know that. So I hastily changed my slides, and I came up right after him and I put up a graph. And I said, look at this. Look at how my project benefited from this thing that I did. And I put up a real graph of a real thing. And then I said, and there's no way you can know what I'm talking about. See, I know what those numbers mean. I know how they were collected. You don't. Until I inform you of this extra stuff, you have no basis to know whether I'm just saying some happy sounding melody or something that should matter to you. You have no way of knowing that. We can't allow speakers to do this kind of thing. That's what I mean when I say, in the context-driven world, we don't trust what so-called polite discourse. This has allowed the preservation of terrible ideas in testing for years beyond their rotted date. Sell-by, forget it. Sell-by date for some of these things was 1971. That was sell-by. They were rotten by 1979. The ideas in ICEB and ISTQB and all that, the basic fundamental attitudes were attitudes laid down in 1972. In the very first book about testing, when the world was a dramatically simpler place than it is now. how can those ideas be virtually unchanged? It's like Aristotelian physics still being taught in schools. Well, it isn't. Or Cartesian physics still being taught in schools. Oh, it isn't. Except in the history of philosophy classes, Cartesian physics is not taught. Galenic medicine is not taught. It dominated Europe for 1,500 years. That must mean it was a best practice. It was a best practice in Europe for 1,500 years. It's not taught anymore because it kills people, because it doesn't work. It never worked. And what happened is, heroically, 300 years ago, some people started standing up and saying, it doesn't work. We have to really investigate the human body, find out how medicine works, apply chemistry to this. And you know what? The English people have led the way in science. All my greatest heroes of history are English and Scottish people. David Hume, John Herschel, William Whewell, who coined the term scientist, Coleridge, who coined the term heuristic in 1820, Babbage, come on, Babbage, computer guy, Lady Lovelace, all the best people. And even the people who weren't English, they came to England to do their best work. You know, Voltaire, Ludwig Wittgenstein. Okay, these are people who, Karl Popper, okay, I think he was Austrian, came to London, taught at the London School of Economics for many years. These are the people who broke things open and redefined modern thought. This should be where modern testing is born. Should be right here in this area. Okay, it's your heritage, and yet there's a bunch of consultants who are saying, no, we know the best practices. We know the best practices. Just listen to us. We know the best practices. And nobody challenges them. And that's the problem. Even if they're right, they should be challenged. They should have to show that they're right. They should have to defend their work. So in my community, in the context-driven community, we defend our work. We consider that very important to accept and deal with the challenges that people make. So transitioning to context-driven, this is what it means. It means that you reject the concept of best practices. There are no best practices. There are only good practices in context. Context rules. And anything you think is a best practice might be a bad practice in another context. Here's an example. Someone once told me, I've got a best practice for you, James. If someone shoots at you, you should duck. Good point. Unless, of course, I'm trying to commit suicide, or if I am in a circus act and the whole point of it is I'm there with an apple on my head and someone's shooting an apple off my head. If I duck, then probably going to ruin the whole act and lose my job. Or what if I'm playing a video game and my son's playing the video game too, and he always gets upset when he gets shot, so I'm constantly sacrificing my character for his convenience because I don't want him to give up playing. I did that for several years before he became much better than me at every video game ever. But when he was 4, I had to take my armies and defend his villages while my armies get destroyed. Because when he was 4 years old, he was a peaceful man. Someday in his biography, the story will be told about how he came from a peaceful man who only built houses and never built any armies in the real-time strategy games we played, to a warlord hungry for blood, which he became by the age of 5. Something terrible happened to him. But I used to protect his peaceful villages, and he would get very upset if any of the enemy broke through, the computerized enemy, broke through to destroy and burn and pillage his villages. So, so sometimes you don't duck, is the point. Sometimes it depends on the situation. See, the difference between me and a lot of people with best practice ism is I have an imagination. I can think of possibilities. I don't know what's wrong with their imaginations. I don't know. They don't want to imagine new things. the school beat it out of them. I don't know what it is, but it's like not convenient for them, it seems, when I argue with countless people I've argued with, and it's like not convenient for them to use their imagination to think of alternatives. What they do instead they say, well, most of the time it's a good practice. Well, what's the point of that? Imagine doing mathematics and saying, the answer's 7. Why did you say the answer's 7? I haven't told you the problem yet. Well, usually the answer's 7. 7 is universally considered to be the best number. They don't teach mathematics that way. I don't understand that attitude. If we took that attitude and put it in other realms, it would be considered insanity. But somehow we tolerate that in our midst in engineering. So to make the transition to context-driven, first you reject best practices, and instead you say, what I need to do is learn how to take responsibility for my practices. I need to learn to read the situation and respond to the situation. That means I must learn how things happen and why things happen. I must study practices. I don't mean studying what people think about practices, like I'm going to memorize lists of other people's words for practices. That's not what I mean. I mean studying, where did a practice come from? Where was it first used? Why does it work? When does it work? And here's a big element. Here's how you really know someone's context-driven. Is when they think in terms of alternatives. You talked about cucumber. You said pros and cons, the good, bad, the ugly, right? And what's interesting is there's a lot of people who will say that. They'll talk about practices in terms of this is good, this is not so good, pros and cons and that sort of thing. But rarely will they say, and here's how it compares to alternatives. Because pros and cons is an interesting dimension, but really it's related to, but how does it stack up? Like, what are the pros and cons of having a giant wedding cake shaped truck the size of a house as your sole means of transportation? Well, I can carry groceries in it. Yeah, okay, that's pro. But wait a minute, hold on. That's not the issue. The issue is, what is our alternatives? Is there maybe a small car that we could use instead? It's not like the pros and cons thing often acts as if, well, you have to take the good with the bad, and there's some good and there's some bad, and ignores the fact that there's a whole bunch of alternative things that we should be comparing against them. When people talk about best practices, they sometimes talk about an alternative practice that they will call something terrible, like in the TMAT book I was looking at the other day, they have a section on called unstructured testing. They never define what unstructured testing is, but they tell you what's bad about it. It's kind of like, what we mean. It's like unstructured testing. What is that? Is that code for something? Is it unstructured testing? That's code for, the undesirable kind of testing. Exploratory testing. Don't say its name, because then James Bach will find it on an index search and then blog about us. Which is exactly what I do, by the way. If you ever say exploratory testing in a blog, that's like invoking the name of the devil. I will pop up because I've got this Google alert that says exploratory testing. I've got Google alerts for lots of things, and that's how I find obscure blogs that are talking. Suddenly I'm commenting. It's kind of draw a pentagram before you do that. So you take responsibility for your practices. You have to gain skills. Context-driven testing means being a skilled tester so that you can decide for yourself what your practices ought to be in a certain situation, so that you can defend those practices. So you might very well use a practice that the factory school people use. You might very well say, I'm going to do some heavy scripted testing. Absolutely. It is called for in this circumstance. Why is it called for, James? Can you defend that? What if we just do this other thing? Why don't we just do some light scripted testing? How about that? How would that be a problem? I'm expected in my community to explain how that would be a problem. I don't want to say, I am not allowed to say, well, I just want to, shut up. I just want to. Like, okay, if you just want to, then say that. Say, I don't know if this is a good practice or not. I would like to experiment with this and learn from that. That's okay, that's allowed, that's fine. But if I say this is the practice that should be followed in this case, then I've got to defend that because the word should is a powerful word. Okay, so you becoming context-driven means accepting a certain ethic of personal responsibility for your actions. That I am an engineer, I must act as an engineer. Now, I don't know whether someone who's a professional engineer would actually consider us engineers, and I don't care. I believe that engineering is about problem solving in a technical context. And that's what I do. And so, words that describe the highest and best things that engineers do also describe me when I'm at my best. And so I don't normally use the term engineer to describe myself. I say I do engineering, but I describe myself as a tester. I'm a tester. I don't like saying test analyst, test architect. I prefer to say tester. I'm a tester. That's what I am. It's on my license plate, tester. And I'm a context-driven tester. And in context-driven testing, we have 7 principles. And one of the principles is people are the most important part of the context. Now, that's a claim we're making, but we have absolutely no evidence for it. We just believe it. You can have a different version of context-driven community which doesn't believe that is not humanist. But we are humanists. And another way that you make the transition to context-driven is you put your ideas out there and invite context-driven people to consider your ideas and engage them in conversation. This is how you join the context-driven community. You basically challenge any acknowledged context-driven person to a duel. A friendly duel with flowers. You know, it's not to the death. But you say I have some test ideas, and I think my test ideas are pretty good, and would you mind looking at them? Could you help me with this stuff? And anyone in my community has to say, all right, well, yes, we are duty bound to help any new person who wants to establish themselves as a thinker in testing. We're duty bound to help them. And I do that all the time. Also, I coach people. I do free online test coaching. I'm working on a book on test coaching. And one of the things that I do is I encourage people I coach to go and coach somebody else. I'm coaching you and I'm not charging you. You go coach somebody else. And that's partly how you're going to learn testing, is by coaching other people. Pass this stuff on. We're a community that really believes in community and helping people and raising people up and creating opportunities for all kinds of people. We don't have any classism in our community, but we do have things where certain people in the community are very highly respected. So if somebody comes in and starts throwing insults at them, then that's going to hurt their credibility. So you have to be careful about that. But anybody can earn a reputation in the context-driven community very quickly. I can name people who were unknown to our community 2 years ago and suddenly just sprang up out of nowhere and then became respected members that we all wonder, what's your opinion on things? There's a guy named Shmuel Gershon, who's in Jerusalem, who is highly regarded in our community. And he just showed up one day, starts demanding meetings, all in a nice way, but saying, oh, could you meet with me at this conference? Can we go to a kosher restaurant? I'm like, yeah, the guy took me to this terrible restaurant. But he's got that kosher thing, so that was a new experience. And but he was such a nice guy, so interesting, so thoughtful. And he was challenging my brother and I. He was very polite, very politely pushing us. But I don't understand how you can claim this. Can you please explain that to me? That kind of thing. And it was wonderful. And I love people like that. And our community embraces people who are challenging like that and who contribute. And he started writing tools. He's written this wonderful thing called Rapid Reporter, which is a test note-taking tool. And it's wonderful. So you can transition to context-driven testing by taking responsibility for yourself, by recognizing that best practices don't exist, by then learning the skills of testing by which you can make your own decisions about practices. You basically become your own testing methodologist. This doesn't mean you don't learn from other people. Sometimes people think, oh, so I have to ignore all these other people who have ideas about practice? Absolutely not. Learn from them. Learn from anyone. You can even learn from TNET and ISTEB and ISTQB. That's a little like drinking from a mud puddle from my point of view, but you can do it, you can do it. It's like Bear Grylls, going out there into the rough and like eating bugs. You can do that. I prefer a different approach personally. I prefer to go to the places they stole those ideas from and get them from their source rather than getting them all, after the, in maggot form. So that's what I prefer, unfiltered in a sense. So you could do that, and then you can join the community on Twitter. You can do a blog, you can respond and comment on people's blogs, and then you become part of the great conversation. Okay, Simon, you've done this. Simon Knight's done this. Adam, you have done this. We had a big argument last week.
Yes, yeah, a couple of weeks ago.
Yes. Right, you came right up, you got right in our faces. We respect that. I'm very happy to have met you in person.
Thanks, pleasure.
Right, and Bill, I'm happy to have met you. You've been to now, if you're in your second RST class, right?
Yeah.
You've gone to the class twice. One with Michael Bolton, one with me. One of the few people who have had both Michael Bolton and me harangue you.
And critique up by the end of the week.
Yes, that's right. We expect critiques. We have to deal with critiques.
Is there rivalry there? Is it?
What?
Is the rivalry there?
Between Michael Bolton and me?
Yeah, who does the best courses?
Well, I would say that Michael Bolton and I are the absolute best of friends. We're very, very close, so I cannot feel a rivalry with him. On the other hand, I do feel like we're playing a giant game of Risk, where I have not been able to break into Norway, but he teaches in Norway. But I own Sweden, although he's been making inroads. He does Russia, but I don't really want Russia. I've got Estonia, and I have Romania. We don't know who's going to be first into Latvia and Lithuania yet, or the Ukraine, but I have a lead in the Ukraine, so I might get that. He's done Spain. He does Germany, which will not hire me. Germany hates me. They hate me. And it makes me feel very bad because my family heritage is German. So I want the German people to embrace me. But they are really into this, you have to follow scripts nonsense. But apparently, Michael Bolton he's kind of a wayfish person who doesn't offend them the way I do. This is good. You can get original recipe rapid testing, or you can get extra friendly from Michael Bolton. He's a friendly, completely non-threatening person. And you can get originally, that's how he started teaching rapid software testing. Was I had a client who did not want me to teach because he didn't like me, and then he found out that Michael might be able to teach it. He said, I'll hire Michael instead. So that was the first time Michael ever did it, was a client who couldn't stand me. And I'm like, hey, great, now there's an option. Now you have an option. But then Michael became very good, and he has. It's been a very productive collaboration with him. So on the one hand, I want all his business, and on the other hand, I have to admit, I think his activities have gotten me a lot more business. And so I want him to be very, very successful. That's another thing you'll find in the context-driven community. When you go independent and you're in the context-driven community, the rest of the context-driven community wants to support you. We love independent people. Now that I know you're independent, now that I know more about you being independent, that's now on my list. I'm working on a list of people I recommend, and I just started expanding it. I have now a new section called the Brits, and I've got I don't know. I hope Brits is not like some pejorative term, and I just don't know it. I never know it. I have the Swedish Pantheon, the Eastern European All Stars, the Thunder Down Under, and the Brits. Right now, and so these are lists of people that I will personally endorse and recommend. It's sort of like certification, except nobody took a test other than having to go through years of withering criticism and dealing with it, and demonstrating by their good works that they are worthy testers. All right, I'm gonna let you go now. It's been a long rambling talk. I love doing this though. so much better than talking to pillows or Furbies. And anyone have any questions? I know I just kind of rant in a way that sometimes discourages people from saying, "Sir, I shall speak now." Yes, Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I've read some stuff of yours before about the whole schools of testing
Yes.
approach, and I can definitely see where you're coming from. But I think it was Adam Urett who posted a comment which basically echoed my own thoughts on it, which was, can I work in an agile environment and still be context driven?
Absolutely.
It's not, I mean, they're not mutually exclusive in your opinion.
They're not mutually exclusive in the sense that if I'm truly a context-driven member of the context-driven community, I take a context-driven approach, that doesn't mean that I can't work in a group that is a factory school-oriented group. It means that I will be really irritated working in that group, because that group will say, this is the way it must be done. Squishy humans must be removed, of course. They'll say things like, but we have to document that, because what happens if you leave? Well, if I leave, then you lose a unique resource that cannot be duplicated. But all humans can be duplicated, even you. And it becomes the step for testers. I'm going to have to put up with that if I'm going to be in a factory school shop, which I can't deal with because I lose my temper. I become Hulk-like.
I don't.
don't.
Community similar to that. Sorry. Similar kind of approach from some people.
Yeah, so sometimes
not
it's
doing
easier.
it right.
Right, sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. You could certainly, as a context-driven person, decide, I'm going to put up with this. I personally don't understand that because I personally cannot put up with anything that I don't like. You can call it a personal failing or a hilarious quirk of my personality, but I am unable to accept anything that I don't think is good work. I want to get as far away from it as possible, which is why I have to travel all over the world to find my clients. I can't just work in Seattle, near my house, which would be great. But that's because of all the companies near Seattle, very few want to hire me. I'm too expensive and I'm very, very demanding. But I have to go to Cape Town, South Africa instead and work there, or Los Angeles and work there, or then come out here and do a class here. And I travel all over because I need the entire world, because I'm very particular about who I work with and how I work. And that's just because I have a temper problem, which I totally admit. I'm like an alcoholic. I've been sober for 20 years. I haven't actually punched anybody in many, many years, but I regularly want to. I regularly feel the itch, and I always size up every man in the room. Like, I think, can I take him? If I have to, can I take him? Okay, so I don't. Maybe other men do this, but I do it. I do it all the time, and it's just a thing that I have a martial personality. I never had the chance to serve in the military. Maybe that was a good thing, because I think I would love the 50 caliber machine gun a little bit too much. So I have to be really careful who I work with, and I'm very good at quitting things. I'm the best quitter. I'm fabulous at resigning. I'm like number 6. I just resign. But I can imagine people who say, I can get along. I have the ability to get along, and I can be context-driven in my heart, and yet still follow templates that I think are nonsense. Right? Sure you can. Is that work you're proud of? If that's okay with you to do that, then fine. But I like to hang out with people who do work that they are proud of. And to be context-driven is to say, I'm doing this because it solves a problem. I'm proud of that. I want to solve problems. Not, I'm doing this because even though it sort of doesn't solve the problem or kind of solve the problem, I'm willing to go along with it. Does that sound like fun to do that?
Is that solving a getting paid problem?
Well, getting paid is a whole different thing. If you want to get paid, you can do ceremonial software testing. You can. There's lots of ways to get paid. By basically, if you entertain somebody, all getting paid boils down to is entertaining someone. I told this to my son when he was very young. I said, "Son, I'll give you room and board and internet, toys at Christmas, electric lights. You want something more than that? You have to entertain me." Because that's how the world works. You do something that makes people go, hurrah, here's some money, sir. So you want something extra? What are you going to do for me? And so he said, at first when he was like 6 years old, 7 years old, he's like, I don't know, Dad, I don't know. I want the toy train. And I go like, well, maybe your mother knows what you can do. And so I remember one time, he's pacing outside the toy train shop with the cell phone, talking to his mom. He comes in and says, Mom said that if I clean this, then I would be okay. So I'm like, okay, I would find that entertaining. It would be entertaining for me if you did something for your mother. So I shall buy you the toy train. And he got really good at this negotiation process. And he started learning to hold things in reserve. He'd come and he'd be ready, and he'd make me an offer. And then I would usually take the first offer, and then he'd go like, oh, I had this other stuff in reserve. Oh man, I got out good. So he became really good at that. All getting paid comes down to is entertaining people. It's not enough for me. I want to be proud of my work. It's not enough just to get paid. So if temporarily I'm in some kind of terrible emergency circumstance, then okay, I can see trying to get along. I personally won't be able to get along because I just have a failing that way. I'm just not able to hold my temper when I think people are trying to do silly things. But I would try to, and I have tried to. I've been on projects that were very marginal for me that I lasted at maybe 3 weeks. My father was the same way. He never was able to hold a regular job in his life. After he got out of the military, he was never able to hold a regular job. So he had to resort to writing best-selling books, which he swears by. He said that's the way to do it. And has all through my life said, why are you doing that job? Write a best-selling book. That's my dad's solution to everything. So I grew up with a sort of a hippie dad in that sense. Any other questions or comments or challenges? Anyone else want to brave the nutcase from America?
I tried that once today.
I was very embracing. That was like that caffeinated me. I didn't know whether you were baiting me or what, but I certainly bit at that bait. He starts talking about, but aren't scripts the best way to do everything? Won't you be crippled without scripting? And he said it in a very nice, like BBC attack dog way, and David Frost kind of. So anyway, that's good. I encourage people to do that in my class, but they have to listen to the rant that follows. Hope that was enjoyable. Yes. Oh, you're the new guy?
I am.
Okay, let's see what happens to you.
So, I just want to sort of see if I've understood because I don't know, before today I knew nothing really about context-driven testing.
Yes.
So it seems to me that it's basically a kind of scientific approach to a testing problem, in the rejection of dogma and the encouragement of sort
Right.
of
We revere the traditions of science. Our heroes are people like Richard Feynman, who said that science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. And I really relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I connect to it, because I'm quite a scientist as well.
What's your field?
Well, I come from a computer science background, but now I'm just basically a sort of test developer.
Okay.
But I have a great opportunity, because I'm in a very small company, which is growing quite quickly. I have a great opportunity to put in my own ideas.
Yep.
This is a really great process.
Uh-huh.
So beyond that, you could say that there is a context in which all of these things are useful. So you could say that cucumber would be useful in a context, provided you don't just say that it is useful.
Oh, you know what? I wanted to talk about that, and I forgot to talk about that because that's a great example. Cucumber is useful in context. For instance, if you want to defraud people out of a lot of money. But more seriously, here's the feeling that I have about it. I don't know how cucumber could be useful in context. What I'm frustrated by is that I have had several people demo this tool to me in a breathless way, saying, "Oh, isn't this cool, James? Isn't this cool?" And they have not been able to answer my basic questions. And so I don't know what it's useful for. I personally haven't experienced it. Remember when I said that context-driven people revere experience? I haven't had experiences with it. I'm not saying it's bad. I don't know. I'm worried about it. I have these strong feelings that I want addressed. So I'm suspending my judgment on Cucumber, but I'm increasingly frustrated at people who push this tool without addressing these basic issues. It makes me wonder, are they just engaged in some kind of fantasy wish fulfillment thing where programmers are so desperately frightened of testing that they say, oh, I'll do anything not to have to do testing. Oh, here's a tool that will absorb all my time. I can use that as an excuse. And I think a lot of tools that come out of the Agile world seem like gee whiz things that are very exciting to people who don't know how to test and don't want to know how to test. But I want to spend my time testing, and I love testing. And when a tool gets in the way of that, even if it's, like you say, not a testing tool, then, but if it takes up testing mind space, then I'm annoyed by that, and I want to raise some kind of alarm about that. So I bet you that if I worked with Cucumber, I might find something useful about it. And then I'd be able to explain it better than people explain it to me. And I'll give you an example. I once tried to use PERT charts and Gantt charts. You know what PERT charts are?
Gantt charts.
Well, Gantt charts and PERT charts kind of go together. PERT charts is where you specify dependencies between tasks. And then usually the Gantt charts then show those dependencies. So imagine Gantt charts with dependencies, okay? And I once created one of these. It took me 80 hours to create, to find all this testing stuff. And it was this product called Mac Project that let me do all this stuff. And it was so cool. And I showed it to my boss. Isn't this great? I got all the dependencies there. And then a single decision was made in my product that invalidated my whole thing and required me to use hours and hours and hours to fix it. And I said, oh, forget it. I'm not going to do that. No way am I going through that again. And I went around saying, Gantt charts are useless for testing. What a waste of time. I was like a dumped boyfriend. And oh, you should see the pictures I have of my old Gantt chart. I want to put them on the internet. So then later on, I found that there was a way to use Gantt charts exactly like what I was doing, but much more effective. And here's the trick. I found myself planning a release project that was only 3 weeks away. And I realized that there were only 32, I think, tasks. The dependencies weren't that hard to deal with. And the Gantt chart really helped. It was tremendously helpful for that small scale activity. Oh, look, this tool I thought was useless actually has particular context where I now endorse it. So I'll bet there's something like that with Cucumber, where there's some way to use it. But I don't see it, and I'm probably not going to be the person who's going to personally investigate this. But I hope somebody in my community, who I respect, will come to me and say, and here's how it will happen. They'll come to me and say, James, you know this stuff you're saying about Cucumber? I think you may be a little over the top with it. Because I've had some experiences and I want to talk to you about it, because I think there's a way that it could be useful. Hear me out. If someone I respect at all comes to me, if you came to me, Simon, or you, Adam, and you said something like that, I go, okay, show me, give it a shot. See how you deal with these objections, and maybe you will deal with the objections. Okay? One of the things I don't know, because I haven't experienced it personally, but I have lots of experience with things like it, is I bet it takes a lot of time to write the underlying glue codes. That's a lot of time. That's my experience from doing this kind of thing back in the early 90s. I didn't do Cucumber, but I did something a lot like Cucumber, and I did it in 1992 at Borland. My team worked for months on it. This big, we called it model-based test automation, because we developed this model, which we would call now a domain-specific language. But none of those terms were in use then. And we just were so burned by it. We put so much work into it, and we had to finally cancel the project and say, this is way too complicated. And meanwhile, if we succeed wildly beyond our wildest imaginations, guess what? We have managed to simulate one dim-witted tester. We have an amazing simulation of a dim-witted tester. We've invented a chatbot, essentially, with all the effort we've put in. Why don't we just do the work? And here's a cautionary tale. that relates to this. I once worked on a project to automate the requests coming into an administrative assistant at Apple Computer. I realize now it's a complete waste of time. The real problem, this administrative assistant didn't like people and didn't want to do anything. That was the problem. And we were trying to solve it by giving her an automated system to handle requests so she wouldn't have to deal with all these confusing people with requests coming in all the time. Right? One person doesn't like her job, and so that spawns an entire engineering project. Okay? And I think about that a lot, because I was in the middle of that, trying to do that, and I didn't think of the bigger picture. Like, why don't we just get another... Now, since then, I have lived 20 years with my wife, who was a highly respected administrative assistant at Apple Computer when I married her. And they always teased me like, oh, you're taking away our best secretary. And I thought they were just saying that to make her feel good or something. But she runs my company now. She owns my company now. She keeps all the paperwork in order. She prides herself on never having a paper out of place. She's an amazing secretary. Amazing. And she puts a lot of work into it. And it just makes you realize, oh, we could have just gotten a much better administrative assistant. How about that? Someone who just really loves doing the work. And my wife doesn't have any automated systems that help her keep organized. She just does her thing in her way. She has some arcane filing system that I'll never figure out, and based on some Da Vinci Code thing. And so when you see someone who really enjoys their work and you see them do it well, it makes you think twice about some of these tools that are such a low standard compared to that. But hey, play with Cucumber, and maybe you'll find some novel use for it that will cause me to have an excited moment in my class where I say, "Ooh, look at this! You can do this. Use this cool thing called Cucumber to do this particular thing with it, and don't believe all that hype. But here's a really cool thing you can do with this tool. Let me show you." Okay, that's the context-driven ethic about that.
I don't want to advocate any particular test. I hold my hands up, so I'm not a tester. My background is development. But we've been using BDD tools for about the past year and a half. And we've enjoyed a fair amount of success using them. I think, certainly I can sympathise with some of the things Simon said earlier. Because I'm not a tester, I don't work extensively with testers. I don't want to say they're better than an equivalent testing solution. I'd like to say, we can only do it kind of context-based development. But if anyone wants to talk about it, I'll happily talk
Experience. You must revere experience, we must analyze experience. Thank you for offering that.
But I certainly wouldn't say it's something that you should rule out completely, but you need to know how to use it when it's appropriate.
Right, and I am not ruling it out at all. I'm saying, I've heard lots of hype in my time. All through the 80s, they were talking about case tools. Case tools were going to make programmers irrelevant. What happened to that? Nothing. Case tool, no one talks about case tools anymore. Case tools failed. I've seen these kinds of hype things come and go. So I might be wrong, but I want somebody else. Someone else is going to play with that. Someone else is going to find what's cool about it. I'm personally not the right person to go in and figure out what's cool about that. So, but people will have experience, and I've heard that like, oh, we are happy with it. Okay, would you have been happy with an alternative? That's what I'm not hearing. Okay, but it's first order, interesting. Okay, you're happy with it. So
I would probably be happy with something else, but for the situation we were in, that was the best and most pragmatic.
Could be. All right.
I'm sure there's plenty of other-
Okay, well, I'm going to let you guys go. Seriously, your prison stay has ended. You've been granted clemency from being in this hot room. It's really hot in here. I thought it was cold out.